Before we dive into this shocking and controversial story, I need you to do something for me. If you're ready to hear the truth, to explore something most people would never admit, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and give us a like. Leave a comment too, because I want to hear your thoughts on this story. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let me tell you a story that's bound to challenge everything you thought you knew about infidelity. I convinced my husband to help her, and what I saw next completely shocked me. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the powerful emotions that came with it, the unexpected shifts in our relationships, and the boundaries we crossed that no one talks about. This isn't just another cheating story. It's a real, raw, and deeply human tale of vulnerability, trust, and the thin line between helping and betraying. So stick with me, because what I'm about to reveal could change the way you think about relationships forever. I clearly remember when the topic was first brought up. Sitting at a cafe, our conversation was flowing like many others until an audacious suggestion hung in the air. My friend, with a lost look in her eyes after her divorce, seemed trapped in a cycle of emotional and physical solitude. It was at that moment that, out of nowhere, I said, "What if you asked for help? Something more intimate?" Casually, I suggested that she share my husband, with the intention of helping her overcome the emptiness she felt. It was such a bold idea, so loaded with emotion, that I couldn't help but wonder, shortly after, if I had just done something irreversible. Her reaction was one of disbelief, which was expected. She leaned back, stared at me, as if trying to understand whether I was serious. I knew she didn't believe what I was suggesting. Who would? Infidelity and betrayal, those words most of us try to avoid, were being offered as a solution, as a balm for the pain. I couldn't deny that there was something provocative and dangerous in what I was suggesting, but at the same time, something that sparked an uncontrollable curiosity. She, speechless, just looked at me, waiting for me to continue. And I did continue. I knew I was playing with the line of morality, but what was morality when it came to human pain? After all, wasn't that what made us more vulnerable, more alive? I wanted her to see this not as a mistake, but as a solution to something greater. An opportunity to heal, to find a way to rise again without having to follow the path of loneliness. This wasn't just about sex, it was about reconnecting with humanity, with one's essence. And that's when the words began to work, planting the seeds of doubt. She didn't know what to do with it, and curiously, the disbelief she felt was transformed into a curious look. I think deep down, she knew it wasn't just about what I was offering. What was at stake here, and perhaps she felt this more than anything else, was the power of suggestion, the possibility of transcending societal norms, the rules of what's right or wrong. But like in every good infidelity story, what's most interesting is what comes after the yes. The provocation I threw could have ended there, but it was only the beginning of something much larger. Something I knew would change all of us forever. And now, what I didn't know was what would truly happen next. As the days passed, I began to notice the subtle shift in her demeanor. My words, once met with disbelief, were now hanging in the air like an unspoken agreement. It wasn't just about suggesting a new form of comfort anymore. It was about creating an opportunity to explore something deeper. The more I spoke, the more the idea seemed to weave itself into the fabric of her thoughts. The power of suggestion, the power of silence, it all came into play. I had planted a seed, and now it was growing, taking root in her mind. I watched her carefully. My friend's internal struggle was evident. Her skepticism had given way to something more complicated: curiosity. It wasn't as simple as accepting what I was offering. No, it was about her own internal battles. She needed time, space, to convince herself that she could actually entertain such a thought. But I knew that the more I let her sit with this, the more intrigued she would become. It's always been that way with people, hasn't it? When you make them question their own boundaries, they often end up crossing them. The silence in our conversations began to speak volumes. I wasn't rushing her. I didn't need to. What I had done wasn't just about laying out a plan, it was about creating the right conditions for her to come to her own conclusions. Little by little, she began asking questions. At first, they were cautious, almost as if she was testing the waters. But I could see it in her eyes. She was coming around. Her disbelief was turning into a slow realization that perhaps, just perhaps, this was an answer she had never considered. It was all coming together, slowly but surely. I had anticipated this moment, the one where she would stop questioning and start accepting. And when that happened, when she finally allowed herself to entertain the idea, I knew the next step would follow naturally. After all, once a door to something forbidden is opened, it's hard to close it again. And as I stood there, watching her, I realized that this wasn't just about helping her. No, this was about my own desires and the control I'd begun to crave. The night arrived, and there we were, the three of us in the same room. There was a strange calmness in the air, almost as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. What began as an idea to provide comfort, to heal an emotional wound, had turned into something much more intimate. The walls around us, emotional and physical, were slowly starting to crumble. It wasn't just the act that was happening in front of me, it was the raw vulnerability that came with it. I was witnessing the very thing I had set into motion, but I couldn't deny the feeling that was growing within me. At first, it was awkward, hesitant. No one knew exactly how to navigate the new dynamic we had created. But as time went on, something shifted. There was a connection, not just between the two of them, but between all of us. I felt it before I could even fully understand it. The bond we were forming was deeper than I had anticipated. What had begun as a simple offering to help someone in pain had turned into a shared experience, a moment of physical and emotional resonance that none of us could have predicted. It was as if we were all searching for something, and this moment, this act, was the answer we didn't know we needed. I watched closely, feeling both a sense of ownership and liberation at the same time. It was as though we were all pieces of a puzzle, slowly finding our place. My friend, no longer a mere spectator, was now fully immersed in the experience. There was no more hesitation, no more doubt. The vulnerability we shared in that room, our bodies and emotions laid bare, was both beautiful and terrifying. It wasn't just an act of physical intimacy. It was a deeper connection, an exploration of desires and needs we hadn't known existed. As I stood there, I realized this wasn't just about the comfort I had promised. No, it was about something much more profound, an exploration of the things we keep hidden even from ourselves. We had crossed a line, yes, but in doing so, we had discovered a depth of connection that was both shocking and liberating. And in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would this be enough? Or was there something even deeper we were about to uncover? At first, I remained on the sidelines, a voyeur of sorts, watching them. The room felt heavy, charged with a kind of energy that I had never experienced before. I found myself caught between wanting to observe and the overwhelming urge to become a part of what was happening. It wasn't just about the physicality of it all. It was the emotional pull, the way it connected us in ways words couldn't express. I wasn't just a passive observer. No, I was feeling everything. My heart raced, my mind whirled, and my body reacted in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was as if I was caught in a current, unsure of where it would lead, but unable to pull away. The longer I watched, the more intense the experience became. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a craving. I was no longer just witnessing an act. I was being drawn in. My thoughts blurred as I struggled to reconcile what I was feeling with what I had intended. This wasn't part of the plan, was it? No, of course not. But then again, when do things ever go according to plan? In that moment, I realized that what I was experiencing was just as much a part of this journey as everything else. I had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. I couldn't help but notice how my emotions were shifting with each passing second. The more I watched, the more I wanted. The lines between observer and participant started to blur, and the temptation to step in grew stronger. It was as if the power of what was happening before me was calling to me, pulling me closer. I wasn't just witnessing a shared moment between them anymore. I was now part of something much larger, something that had the potential to change everything. It was no longer just about helping my friend. It had become about my own desires, my own journey into the unknown. And then, almost without realizing it, I crossed that line. It wasn't a decision I made consciously, but one that came naturally as the power of the moment took hold of me. I couldn't resist the pull anymore. The power of observation had transformed into a power of participation. And in that moment, as I joined them, I knew that what had started as a simple offer of help was now something far more complex, far more intimate than I had ever imagined. The question that lingered in my mind was no longer whether this was the right thing to do. It was whether I was ready for what was to come next. As the moments unfolded, I couldn't ignore the shift in my own thoughts and feelings. What had initially seemed like an altruistic act, helping my friend heal, was starting to reveal a different side of me. The lines I had so carefully drawn between myself and the situation began to blur, and I found myself questioning my own motivations. Was I really just trying to help her, or was there something deeper at play here? It was hard to admit, but the truth was undeniable. I had gained just as much from the experience as she had, if not more. It was an unsettling realization, one that I couldn't shake off. I found myself grappling with this internal conflict, torn between the role I had assumed as the caring friend and the desires that were now bubbling to the surface. Was it wrong to admit that I, too, had enjoyed the experience? That I had felt a rush of excitement, a sense of empowerment, in being part of something so intimate? The more I reflected on it, the more I realized how complicated the situation had become. What started as an act of compassion had turned into something that was both emotionally and physically fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had crossed a line, yes, but I was no longer sure where that line even existed. The experience had been profound, leaving me to question my own boundaries. Was this really about helping her? Or was it about satisfying my own hidden desires, the ones I had buried for so long? I had always believed in being open, in pushing past the conventional boundaries of society, but now I was forced to confront the reality of what that meant. My intentions had been blurred in ways I hadn't planned for, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was an active participant in something that was changing all of us. I couldn't deny the temptation to continue down this path, to explore further what had been awakened in me. The experience had changed me, had shifted something deep within. And though I knew I should feel guilty or conflicted, I didn't. Instead, I felt an inexplicable sense of liberation. This wasn't just about helping my friend, it was about understanding a side of myself that I had long ignored. And as I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder, where would this all lead? What would happen next, now that the lines had been blurred so completely? The morning after was surprisingly serene. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just a quiet warmth that settled between us. I had expected to feel something, guilt, confusion, even shame, but instead, I felt peace. It was as if the experience had brought us closer, in ways I couldn't quite explain. My friend, now no longer just a companion in this journey, seemed content, almost relieved. And my husband, well, he seemed just as calm, his eyes soft with understanding. We had all crossed a line, yes, but it felt as though we had done so with full consent, with an unspoken agreement that we would not look back. As we went about our day, the world around us seemed unchanged, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably. It wasn't that the act itself had been earth-shattering, but rather that it had unlocked something new within each of us. We had ventured into forbidden territory, and yet there was no regret. I found myself reflecting on how unusual it was to feel such a profound sense of acceptance. There were no lingering doubts, no questioning of what had happened. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement that it had been exactly what needed to happen at that moment. What struck me the most was the ease with which we moved forward. There was no discomfort, no sense of obligation. It wasn't like the stories of infidelity you hear about, the ones filled with guilt and betrayal. No, this was different. It was as though we had all found a new way to connect, a deeper understanding of our needs and desires. The fact that it didn't end in regret only added to the complexity of what had transpired. We had all shared something incredibly intimate, something that many might have deemed taboo, and yet it was as if we were walking away from it, as if it were just another chapter in our lives. It made me wonder, how many people in the world had experienced something similar and never talked about it? How many had crossed those boundaries only to be consumed by guilt and shame? We hadn't. And it made me question everything I had ever believed about infidelity, about what was right and wrong. Was this really a mistake? Or had we simply embraced a truth that most people were too afraid to confront? The experience didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like an act of mutual understanding. And as I looked at the two of them, I knew that what we had shared would stay with us, in some form, for a long time. What would you have done in my shoes? How would you navigate a situation where the line between right and wrong becomes blurred, where the truth is hard to face, but even harder to ignore? I've shared my story, but now it's time for you to reflect. How would you react if you were faced with the same emotions, the same choices? Would you push boundaries, or would you stay within the safety of what's expected? I challenge you to think deeper, to explore those uncomfortable places where the truth lies. This story isn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It's about human nature, vulnerability, and the choices we make when we're pushed to the edge. So, what are you waiting for? If this story resonated with you, or if you want to learn more about how we navigate these tough situations, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, and let's keep learning together.